thought that I'd be standing in the place I'm in. It took a little faith to see. Gotta chase the dream that you placed in me. Never thought I would be praying the prayers I prayed. Never thought I would be saying the things I say. But you've been with me every step of the way. You've been, you'll be working everything for the best for me. So I trust in who you are. Every step of the way. You've been, you'll be fighting right, you loving my story. You've held my heart every step of the way. Every step of the way. Even in the upside down, even when it all feels turned around, I know you've got me every step of the way. Every step of the way. You've been, you'll be working everything for the best for me. So I trust in who you are. Every step of the way. You've been, you'll be fighting right, you loving my story. You've held my heart every step of the way. 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 I got so many broken pieces in me I don't want you to see, 'cause in honesty I'm barely holding on. 'Cause every look in the mirror reminds me of all of the times that I failed, and I find I'm barely holding on. When you speak, every despair is relief, and all depression must cease. The sound of your voice is the sound of the broken redeemed. Shame is no more, sin is divorced. The sound of your voice is the sound of the broken redeemed. Every down, every fear that I've held, I can lay them all down, 'cause I see it now, they're barely holding on. Yeah. You called me to greater, you've called me to higher, you've called me to walk in power every hour with you. When I do, yeah, every despair is relief, and all depression must cease. The sound of your voice is the sound of the broken redeemed. Shame is no more, sin is divorced. The sound of your voice is the sound of the broken redeemed. By the blood of the Lamb, made spotless and perfect again. Redeemed to the Father, sisters and brothers, come back to His wide open hands. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, made spotless and perfect again. Redeemed to the Father, sisters and brothers, come back to His wide open hands. Every despair is relief, and all depression must cease. The sound of your voice is the sound of the broken redeemed. Shame is no more, sin is divorced. The sound of your voice is the sound of the broken redeemed.
One more time. Testing, testing. Stephen Cole, I don't see him in here, but he was picking on me before I came in here. Said I should start at about 7:15 and make sure I last till 8. So next time we play paintball, I got something for you, Stephen. I'm going to talk about not delivered from the trouble, but delivered through it.
Aaron found a little earring under the kitchen table. Under one of the tables in the dining room. The first one, it was a little gold and silver, about smaller than a dime.
So if anybody's missing an earring, come see Judy.
They're not in here right now, but oh well. Your nose ring. I hadn't thought about that. Could it be man or woman?
We have any prayer requests for today?
Just pray for the spring event. We're getting a lot more interest in people signing up, but
Spring event?
It's such a great day, Saturday week.
Okay. Let's open in prayer.
That birthday party in Alabama.
I'm sorry?
The victims of that birthday party in Alabama.
Okay.
I think what's the matter?
5 were killed.
5, wow.
26
They were shot or
were
something? I
injured.
hadn't heard. Oh.
All right. Let's open up in prayer. Dear God, our Father, I just want to pray for the victims in Alabama and the spring event, and as well as other ministries at Temple. I want to thank you for the day, a day not promised, and a day I get to enjoy, that we get to enjoy. Your mercy is so great that even non-believers get to enjoy it. I pray you will reveal this to them, Lord. Lord, I'm often amazed at your love and grace, and I thank you for them and your Son. It's in his wonderful name I pray. Amen. So, quite often we look to God for deliverance from trouble. Yet that's not always his way. Sometimes God determines we can give him greater glory by safely bringing us through trouble rather than avoiding it. Noah spent 100 years of labor preparing the ark and 1 year living on it. So think about that. Preparing something for 100 years to use it 1 year. Or in a much smaller way, look at it like it's spending 100 days to prepare and 1 day using it. Or 100 hours doing something and 1 hour using it. Like a test. You study for a test. Imagine studying for a test for 100 hours and your test is an hour long. Like in school. It shows obedience. When Noah came off the boat, he came out to a world that had to be completely rebuilt. Noah had to rebuild it. God's way saved Noah. But then Noah still had to put in work to live and start over. God's deliverance for Noah didn't mean that he had no troubles, but that he had God's faithful provision in all of his troubles. God instructs Noah to build an ark and gives the measurements in cubits. A cubit was the length from the elbow to the finger, roughly 18 inches. Half a yard for you football guys. And a yard and a meter is about the same length, right? So we're going to turn in our Bibles and read Genesis 6:13 through 16. 6:13 through 16. Tommy got me watching Animal Planet up here.
What's on behind you, though?
Okay. I really kind of enjoyed digging into verses one by one and learning to them in an expository way. I didn't even know what expository meant until I heard Shane say it one time and I had to Google it. But That's always fun to me, is taking each verse and kind of dissecting it and learning from it. So Genesis 6:13 through 16, when God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits. And its height, 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and finish it to a cubit from the top, and set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with the lower, second, and third decks." God told all of this to Noah with the intention of saving Noah and his family. In the midst of such corruption and judgment, there is also grace. So instead of wiping out the entire race, God preserved a small surviving group. In verse 14 through 16, God tells Noah to build an ark. This means it was Noah's project. He couldn't simply contract it out to somebody else. He couldn't say to his neighbor, "Hey, bro, I got a job for you. I need a favor. Can you do this for me?" Or he couldn't say, "I'm sure God will get somebody else to do it, since he knows I'm busy. I don't have time." No, it's his job. A lot of those excuses probably sound true to this day, right? I know I use those excuses sometimes. The ark was as long as a 30-story building is high. So about 450 feet, 150 yards. So over a football field and a half. It was about 75 wide. It's 25 yards wide. 45 feet high, 15 yards high. So it's described as not really a boat, but a well-ventilated barge, meant to only float and not sail anywhere. After all, an ark is a chest, not a ship. This refers to the shape of the vessel. So I'm about to throw out a lot of measurements. I don't expect you to remember them. I'm just trying to give you a reference. I want you to imagine how big the ark is. Until I started doing the study, I really didn't understand, the size and significance of this. The ark, roughly the shape of a shoebox, was plenty large enough. It was about the size of the Titanic. Had a cubit wide opening, so 18 inches, half a yard, all the way around the top. The ark was essentially a large rectangle made of gopher wood. Gopher wood, or cypress wood, was later used by the Phoceans for a ship building because of its lightness and durability. It was not until 1858 that a boat bigger than the ark was built. The ark was certainly big enough to do the job. If the ark carried 2 of every family of animals, there were around 700 pairs of animals. But if the ark carried 2 of every species of animals, there was around 35,000 pairs of animals. And it was big enough to do it. The average size of a land animal is smaller than a sheep. So we think, it's got all these animals in there, how could it really hold it? But you got to think, really, most animals are pretty, small. The ark could carry 136,560 sheep in half of its capacity. That's how big this is. Half of its capacity could hold 136,560 sheep. Leaving plenty of room for people, food, water, whatever provisions were needed. Scholars estimate that less than half of the space provided on the ark would be needed to house 17,600 species of animals found on the planet today. The ark was 3 levels high, with each level being about 15 feet tall. The average man is only, 5'9", 6 foot. And a window or door on the side near the top. Its carrying capacity equaled that of 522 standard railroad stock cars, each of which can hold 240 sheep. So 240 times 522. Keep in mind, God had not yet told Noah why he must build the ark. At this point, all Noah knew is that God will judge the earth and he was supposed to build a big barge. That's all he knew. Since it hadn't rained on earth yet, it was reasonable to suppose Noah didn't even know what God meant. He just obeyed. Think about that. It never rained. Noah's going by faith. We nowadays have issue trusting God with the smallest amount of faith. We say, Jesus, take the wheel, but then we try to take it back. As soon as it doesn't start going like we planned, we want to take control and try to fix it. God told Noah you should make it, and Noah did make it. Beyond the Bible, there's rich historical evidence for reality of Noah's Ark. So I'm about to give you some things that happened in history just to prove this existence. In 275 BC, Berosus, a Babylonian historian, wrote, "But of this ship that grounded in Armenia, some parts still remain in the mountains, and some get pitch from the ship by scraping it off." Around 75 AD, Josephus said the locals collected relics from the ark and showed them off to this very day. He also said all the ancient historians he knew of wrote about the ark. In 180 AD, the Theophilus of Antioch wrote, "The remains of the ark are to this day to be seen in the mountains." An elderly Armenian man in America said that when he was a boy, he visited the ark with his father and 3 scientists. In 1856, their goal was to disprove the ark's existence, but they found it and became so enraged they tried to destroy it, but they could not because it was so large and it was petrified. In 1918, one of the atheist scientists, an Englishman, admitted on his deathbed the whole story was true. In 1876, a distinguished British statesman and author, Viscount James Bryce, climbed Mount Ararat and reported finding a 4-foot-long piece of hand-tooled timber at an altitude of more than 13,000 feet. In the early part of the century, a Russian aviator named Vladimir Rokovitsky, these names may not be exact, okay, claimed the discovery of Noah's Ark. He was stationed near southern Russia near the Turkish border in Mount Ararat. As he tested a plane, he and his co-pilot flew over the mountain and discovered on the edge of the glacier what he described to be the boat the size of a battleship. And he said it was partially submerged in a lake. And you can see that there was an opening for a door nearly 20 feet. That's almost 7 yards square. But the door was missing. Rokovitsky told his commanding officer, and an expedition was dispatched to find the ark and photograph it. The report was forwarded to the Tsar, who was soon overthrown. The photos and the report perished. In 1936, a young British archaeologist named Hardwick Knight hiked across Ararat and discovered interlocking hand-tooled timbers at a height of 14,000 feet. There have been many more recent attempts to find and document the ark, but they've been hindered by politics and surrounded by controversy. So what I'm trying to get across is that this is a real-life, actual object. People have witnessed. It's not a lie, story, fib, or a fable. This barge is proven. The existence is proven. Go back to verse 14. God says in verse 14 to cover it inside and out with pitch. The pitch you worked to waterproof the wood, so it makes it possible the ark was preserved for a long time. It's possible that God still has a purpose for the ark. Maybe to remind the world of a past judgment shortly before bringing a future judgment. Peter in 2 Peter 3:1-7 relates the future judgment to the judgment of the flood, saying, "Unbelievers willfully forget the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water." Perhaps before Jesus returns, God will make it more necessary for people to willfully forget these things. Because of this mention of pitch, it's kind of like imagine like a tar, petroleum product. And what most people think of the Middle East, John D. Rockefeller looked for it and found oil in the region based on this verse. So we're going to move to Genesis 6:17-7:1. Now behold, even I am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life. From under heaven, everything that is on the earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you. You shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, and the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing on the ground after his kind, 2 of every kind will come to you and keep them alive. As for you, take yourself some of all food which is edible, and gather it to yourself, and that shall be food for you and for them. Thus Noah did, according to all that God had commanded him, so he did. Then the Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this generation. We can only wonder what Noah felt when he heard this remarkable announcement from God. God called Noah to an essential role in the greatest judgment and greatest salvation the world has ever seen. Despite the dramatic judgment coming, God will make a covenant with Noah, and he and his family will be saved. God will also use Noah to save a remnant of each animal so the earth could be populated with people and animals after the flood. God also commanded Noah to take all the food he could. There must have been a lot of food for Noah and the animals, right? It's a lot of mouths to feed. Verse 22 shows Noah's obedience. When giving this staggering job to do, what did Noah do? He did it. We don't hear him complaining or rebelling or making excuses. He simply obeyed. He just did it. The words "so he did" cover an awful lot of material in years, yet Noah did not shrink from what God told him to do. God told him to get the food. You think he got the food in one day? That was over years probably. The Bible presents Noah as a great hero of God. He is an outstanding example of righteousness in Ezekiel 14:14, a preacher of righteousness in 2 Peter 2:5, and Noah condemned the world by offering salvation in the ark that the whole world rejected in Hebrews 11:7. Noah was a preacher of righteousness in 2 Peter 2:5, yet in his 120-year ministry, it seems no one was saved. I wrote this before I heard Shane's preaching the other day. When he was talking, he hit on the same thing. Just showed me how sovereign God was. Can you imagine throwing the seed for 120 years and no one comes to the Lord? That's how long it took him to build the ark, right? 120 years he's building this ark, telling people, hey, judgment's coming. And they're like, man, this guy's crazy. I'm not listening to this dude. Nobody's ever saved. We have one person turn us down when we try to throw the gospel. We get scared and go home and forget about it, start watching TV. The work of the building of the ark was laborious, costly, tedious, dangerous, and seemingly foolish and ridiculous, especially when all things continued in the same posture and safety for so many scores of years together. Whereby Noah, without doubt, was all that while the song of the drunkards and the sport of the wits of that age. So it's not strange that he is mentioned as a heroic act of faith. That's what Spurgeon said about it. And then in Genesis 7:1, God invites Noah into the ark. The idea is that God was in the ark, and he called Noah to come into the ark with him. Then the Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time. So this is before the Holy Spirit was left for believers. So we had the tabernacle. But this time, God is actually in the ark, inviting Noah to come tabernacle or to fellowship with him. Notice that the Lord did not say to Noah, go into the ark, but come into the ark. Implying that God himself was in the ark, waiting to receive Noah and his family into the big ship was to be their place of refuge while all the people on the face of the earth were drowned. Noah spent the years before the flood in active obedience. He not only believed God would send the flood, he obeyed what God would do to him in preparation for it. God tells Noah, build the ark, load the animals, store the food for his family and animals, and to get on board. It's interesting that as we compare his task concerning the animals with that of the food, different terminology is used. Noah's instructed to bring 2 of every kind of animal into the ark, but he is also instructed to take and gather the food for himself. Did he have to gather the animals or simply load them? The answer is in 7:9, Genesis 7:9. There went into the ark to Noah by twos, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. For Noah and his sons to collect a pair of each animal would be impossible. A team of thousands would take years to accomplish that task. Chapter 6, verse 20 also states, 2 of every kind shall come to you, indicating that God brought the animals to us supernaturally. Can you remember a time in your life when God gave you what seemed to be like an impossible task? What was your response? This next part, it was really hard for me to put in here because I was kind of worried what people would think. But after redoing it, I wanted to bring God glory. So I can think of a time I overcame addiction, or I should say God overcame my addiction, and he brought me along for the ride. Because he gets all the glory, not me. All I get glory for is messing up my life. Often in following God, we worry and waste time trying to do what only God can do, while neglecting specific areas that are under our control. Areas such as attitudes, relationships, and responsibilities. Where God guides, he provides. Either by giving us the tools we need to accomplish the task, or by taking care of those things himself. He will do one or the other. God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. LaDon said something in a sermon one time I liked a lot. Don't get your job and God's job mixed up. You do your job. God's going to handle his. Last group of verses I want to look at is Genesis 7:10 through 24. I said the last group, so we got more verses, but this is the last group of verses. Genesis 7:10 through 24. Now it came about after the 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 2nd month, on the 7th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife and his 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after his kind, and every bird after his kind, all sorts of birds. So they went to the ark to Noah by twos of all flesh, in which the breath of life. Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God had commanded him, and the Lord closed it behind him. Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark, so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts, and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind. Of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things, and to the birds of the sky. They were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Noah, the animals, and his family had to wait in the ark 7 days for the rain to come. So they're just sitting there waiting, like any day now. There was no TV or iPhones or anything, so they couldn't just hang out and play, They had never seen rain up to this point. It was a real test of faith. To wait a week after more than 100 years preparing it. So we prepared it for 120 years, and then you go in there and you're still waiting a week just to see what's going to happen. This was when the heavens containing the great waters that were above the firmament, Genesis 1:7, opened up. These waters formed the huge so-called blanket of water in the upper part of the earth's atmosphere since creation. Waters came up from the earth also, no doubt accompanied by great geological catastrophe. The number 40 becomes associated with testing purification, especially before entering into something new and significant. This is seen in Moses' time on Mount Sinai in Exodus 24:18, Deuteronomy 9:25, the spies' trip to Canaan in Numbers 13:25, Israel's time in the wilderness in Numbers 14:33 and 32:13, Elijah's miraculous journey to Sinai in 1 Kings 19:8, and Jesus' temptation in the wilderness in Mark 1:13. In verse 16, everything was fulfilled exactly as the Lord had spoken. All things were ready for the flood God would bring upon the earth. Noah did not have to shut the door on anyone's salvation. God did it. After the same pattern, it is never our job to disqualify people from salvation. If the door is to be shut, God will shut the door, not man. God kept the door open until the last possible minute, but there came a time when the door had to be shut. When the door is open, it's open. When it's shut, it is shut. It's that simple. And for some, it should be scary. Revelation 3:7 says, He is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one opens. The ark was salvation for Noah, but condemnation for the world. There were no second chances for those left out. When the 120 years were over and God's Spirit would no longer strive with men, there stood the great ark with its vast door wide open, and still Noah continued to preach and declare to all that would come into the ark to safety, they would be saved from the coming destruction. Outside that door, death would reign universally, but all would be peace within. In our lives too, one day the door will shut and it will be too late. The description of the flood in verse 18 is so complete and specific that it's impossible to reconcile a local flood with a biblical record. Despite the claims of some, this is a description of a global catastrophe. If this were not a global flood, then the ark itself would be unnecessary. They could just go to the dry land. They could just move. If this is a local flood, then God's promise to never again bring such flood is false. If this were only a local flood, the Bible is wrong when it traces all of humanity back to Noah's sons and other passages that speak of a universal flood, such as Psalm 104, 5-9, and 2 Peter 3, 5-6. Literally, hundreds of people groups have their own accounts and legends of the flood. One of the most remarkable is the Babylonian account, which is similar to the Genesis account in many ways and clearly drawn from it. Since all mankind came from Noah's sons, all mankind remembers the flood. Boyce specifically cites the legends of the Samo-Kubo tribe in New Guinea, the Indians of America, the Indians of Arizona, Brazilian tribes, Peruvian Indians, African, Hottentots, natives of Greenland, native Hawaiian Islanders, Hindus, Chinese, Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, Australian natives, the Welsh, Celts, Druids, Siberians, and Lutherans. Of more than 200 cultures, there's been an account of a flood, and the following is true for each one. 88% describe a favored family. 70% attribute survival to a boat. 95% say the sole cause of the catastrophe was a flood. 66 say that the disaster was due to man's wickedness. 67 record that animals were also saved, and 57 describe that the survivors end up on a mountain. Many accounts specifically mention birds being sent, a rainbow, and 8 persons being saved. The reason I tell you all that is if so many different cultures are saying this happened, how can we discount it? Get back on track. Verse 20, and the mountains were covered. This took a lot of water, but there is plenty of water on the earth today to do this. But because the way the natural and physical features of the earth are laid out, the water is collected into oceans. If the earth was perfectly sphere, like a perfect round, then the water would raise 2.5 to 3 miles above the mountains. Before the great flood, the earth may have been closer to a perfect sphere. Who knows? This next part's for Judy. Verse 22, it says, all in whose nostrils, because back up, last week she asked a question of were the fish drowned. So that's why I made that comment. Or how did they die? All in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, all that was on dry land died. So in the Scopes monkey trial in America in 1925, Clarence Darrow humiliated William Jennings Bryan by asking him if he believed every word of the Bible. When Bryan said that he did, Darrow asked him how the fish drowned in the flood, and Bryan didn't know the answer. He didn't know what to say. He gave a long, confusing speech, and the next day he died. If only he would have known the Bible better, he would have known what it says. The breath of the spirit of life. The fish did not die in the flood. Only animals with the breath of the life in them died. The animals on dry land. This shows how easily things can be missed in the Bible and how important it is to learn God's word for yourself. Not just depending on pastors or teachers for the answers. To actually pick it up and read it. God did just as he said. Virtually all of Noah's contemporaries did not believe God would do do just as he said. Though it took 120 years, God demonstrated that he keeps his promises and is totally faithful. Can any man say that? Can anybody say they're totally faithful to the word? My wife will tell you I can. I'm just kidding. She'll tell me I can't. The flood lasted 150 days without receding. Some suggest that God put some or many of these animals into a period of hibernation, meaning less food and space and supervision was needed. God provides many animals today with an amazing instinct for hibernation. It will be no difficulty for him to impart a unique instinct for these animals, for him to do the same thing on the ark. Now, safe in the ark, God sustained Noah and his family through this time of catastrophe and judgment. Shut in and sheltered from the storm and flood, they were safe. Imagine all the things God keeps us safe from that we don't see. All the missed accidents, all the missed sicknesses. It's truly amazing. So let's look back at Genesis 7:10 through 24, what we just read, and we're just going to do some simple questions. In verse 10, when did the flood begin? About 7 days after it started, right? It goes into detail of how old Noah was in the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, on the 17th day of the month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open and the floodgates of the sky opened. So in verse 12, how long did it rain? 40 days, 40 nights. And verse 13 and 14, who and what were saved from the flood? Noah and his family, as well as the animals God sent, right? It says, on this very day, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, sons of Noah, Noah's wife, 3 wives of sons with them, entered the ark, they and every animal according to his kind, and livestock according to their kind, creeper crawling things that crawled on the earth according to his kind, and every bird according to his kind, all sorts of birds. So in verse 16, who shut the door of the ark? God did. The Lord closed the door behind them. Verse 20, how high did the water rise? 15 cubits higher than the mountaintops. Verse 22, what all died due to the flood? All that was on dry land, all those with nostrils, as the breath of the Spirit of life died. And lastly, how long did the flood last? Verse 24. 150 days. After 7 days of silence, the thunder clouds burst forth, and rain began to fall. At the same time, the fountains of the great deep burst open, indicating the water was coming from the ground as well as the sky. All the text tells us that the water increased greatly. Our knowledge of moving water tells us that it was not gentle, was it? All this water flushing in, raging in, it wasn't gradually filling up like a pool. It was destruction. It left destruction in its wake so that all the flesh that moved on the earth perished. Of all that was on dry land. By this flood, the Lord blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land. The world of the past was very different from the world we know today. The archaeologists and theologians agree on this. Not only were there many more kinds of plants and animals, but the biblical record indicates that man's lifespan was significantly longer prior to the flood. After the flood, man's protein needs were greater. In God's instruction, he ceased to be a vegetarian. Thank you, Lord. Genesis 9:3. Till the judgment of Noah's time, rain had never been known. Genesis 2:6 tells us a mist used to rise from the earth and water the whole surface of the ground. Many creation scientists think that prior to the flood, the earth was enveloped in a dense vapor canopy of the atmosphere of moisture. South Georgia still feels like this in the summer months. The results of such of a canopy would be a greenhouse environment with high humidity and universally warm climate, something the fossil records indicate was true of the past. This would explain where the water came from to rain constantly for 40 days and nights. Those who have experienced a localized flood can begin to appreciate the catastrophe of a global flood. Disaster and chaos covered the earth. Scientists believe that with the flooding, there was also massive volcanic activity and geological disturbance. Though Noah was protected from harm in this flood, he did not escape it. Just because we're protected doesn't mean we'll escape it. God took him through the flood. God does not always deliver us from trouble. Sometimes he delivers us in the midst of it. God's deliverance from Noah didn't mean that he had no troubles, but that he has God's faithful provisions in the midst of his troubles. So I wanted to add this from the New Testament because I love this verse. I wrote this down in my Bible like 3 years ago just because it was so impactful to me. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 10:13. 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. We often want to excuse our particular tempting circumstances as very unique, as a special exception. But God reminds us that our temptation is not unique. Somebody's went through this before. You know, we're not that special. You're not that special. I'm not that special. Many other men and women of God have faced the same or similar temptation and have found strength to God to overcome the temptation. There is no temptation now that wasn't around in biblical times. Lust, addiction, doesn't matter. It's all there. Others before you have found the strength in the Lord to overcome your same temptation and worse. So you can be victorious in the strength of Jesus. Not in your own strength. It's not going to get you anywhere. We fight temptation with Jesus' power. When Satan comes with temptation to the door of our heart, we send Jesus to answer. That's how you combat it. God has promised to supervise all temptation that comes to us through the world, the flesh, or the devil. He promises to limit it according to our capability to endure it. He promises to limit it according to our capability to endure it. According to our capability as we rely on Him, not our capability as we rely on ourselves. Satan would destroy us in a minute if God would let him, even as he wanted to destroy Job in Job 1:6 through 12, and Peter in Luke 22:31. But God did not let him. Like a mom who keeps her child from a candy aisle in a store, knowing that the child won't be able to handle itself, won't be able to restrain itself around that temptation, God keeps us from things we can't handle. The Bible shows us this. But the things we can and can't handle change over the years. God has promised to not only limit our temptation, but also provide a way of escape in tempting times. He would never force us to use the way of escape, but He will make an escape available. It's up to us to take God's way of escape. The way of escape isn't the same as mere relief from a pressure of temptation, which is some people find by giving in to temptation. There's often a wrong way to relieve a temptation, and we will often face the same temptations over and over again until we show Satan in our flesh that we're able to bear it. It seems to get a tiny bit easier every time we bear it. Fortunately, most of the time, people would rather give in to sin and plan to ask God for forgiveness than to actually ask God for the strength to endure it. I'm going to read it again. Most of the time, people would rather give in to sin and then plan to ask God for forgiveness than to ask God for the strength to bring them through something. Think of it this way. You have an army surrounded by an enemy, and suddenly they found a mountain pass, and the terrain's really rough, and it's got, mud or whatever, and sharp cliffs. They have a way out. It's better than they're, dying in their sin, dying to that army. It may not be roses, but they have a way out. That's what God does for us. The way of escape leads us to a place where we are able to bear it. We're reminded that to be tempted is not sin, but to entertain temptation or surrender to temptation is sin. When we bear temptation, Satan often condemns us for being tempted. That happens to me all the time. I feel guilty for my mind going somewhere. But that is condemnation from Satan the Christian does not need to accept. Think of it this way. Jesus was tempted, but He never sinned, right? Satan will take the resisted temptation and try to use it to condemn us and make us feel guilty or shame. Turn to James 1:12, please. See, Stephen Cole didn't know what he was talking about. I already had this. Man who preserves under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love Him. This sounds like one of Jesus' beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount. In those statements of blessing, Jesus did not tell us only the ways we can be blessed. Here we learn we can be blessed as we endure temptation. It does not say blessed is the man who is never tempted, nor does it say blessed is the man who finds all temptation easy to conquer. Instead, the promise of is given to the one who endures temptation. There's a special gift of blessedness from God to the one who can say no to temptation, thereby saying yes to God. Here James states the purpose of God in allowing temptation. The purpose is to approve us, that through the testing we would be revealed as genuine and strong in our faith. Temptation is one of the various trials in James 1:2 we face. As we preserve through temptation, persevere through temptation, we are approved and will be rewarded as the work of God in us is evident through our resistance of temptation. James reminds us that it really is worth it to endure under the temptations we face. The steadfastness will be rewarded as we demonstrate our love for Jesus by resisting temptation. Where it says to those who love him describes the motive for resisting temptation. Because of our love for God, the passions of sinful temptation can only really be overcome by a greater passion, and that is the passion for the honor and glory in relationship with God. Some resist temptation because of the fear of man. The thief suddenly becomes honest when he sees the cop, right? The man or woman controls their lust because they don't want to be found out and embarrassed. Others resist the temptation to sin because of the power of another sin. A greedy person doesn't want to party because they don't want to spend their money. But the best motive for resisting temptation is to love him, Jesus, with greater power and greater passion than you love your sin. James 1:13 through 15. No one is to say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it has run its course, brings forth death. Temptation does not come from God. Though he allows it, God himself does not entice us to evil, though God may test our faith. Nor does God himself tempt anyone. James knew that most people have an evil tendency to blame God when they find themselves in trials. Yet by his nature, God is not tempted in the sense that we are tempted, nor does he himself tempt anyone. God sometimes allows great tests to come to his people, even some who might be thought of as his favorites. So, do you know the difference in being tested and being tempted? I had a conversation with some brothers just a few weeks ago. They may seem like the exact same thing, tested and tempted, but they're not. Especially when you're going through them, they're going to seem like the same thing. One is from God and one is from Satan. You're being tested is from God, you're being tempted is from Satan. And it can happen at the same time. God doesn't tempt us. Instead, temptation comes when we are drawn away by our fleshly desires and enticed, with the world and the devil providing the enticement. Sometimes I think Satan gets too much credit. Really, you do what you want to do because you want to do it, not because the devil made you do it. Satan certainly tempts us, but the only reason temptation has a hook in us is because of our own fallen nature, which corrupts our desires. We often give Satan too much credit for his tempting powers and fail to recognize that we are drawn away by our own desires. Some people practically beg Satan to tempt them. Coming from corrupt desire is sin. Coming from sin is death. This progression to sin is an inevitable result that Satan always tries to hide from us, but we should never be deceived about it. Whenever you see things on TV, lust, alcohol, sex, fill in the blank, they never have a warning sign that says, hey, this is unbiblical. It's going to lead you to hell. Satan's great strategy and temptation is to convince us that we are in pursuit of our own corrupt desires to somehow produce life and goodness for us. Like an old cartoon with Satan on the shoulder saying, try this, you'll love it. If we remember that Satan only comes to steal, kill, and destroy, then we can more effectively resist deceptions of temptation. Once temptation crosses the line in our mind as sin, the Spirit will warn us before we get there and convict us if we cross it. Satan and our flesh will entice and then condemn. There's a big difference between condemnation and conviction. One is destructive, one is constructive. Just want you guys to go home thinking of, has there ever been a time in your life where you're surprised by a trial because you expected God to deliver you from it? And you didn't want to go through it, but he didn't deliver you from that? And you're looking back, can you see ways the Lord enabled you to walk through the trial instead of around it? Right up at time, any comments or questions before I pray us out? All right. Sorry.
A lot of good material.
Thanks. Lord, I just want to thank you for your word, for us to have the opportunity to gather as believers and study your word and your word that's been ordained by the Holy Spirit. So many things in this life we take for granted. So many things are overlooked in our day-to-day lives that we become accustomed to them and we see them as entitlements instead of rather than blessings. Lord, I pray that we will slow down and see your blessings, just like your son who died on the cross. It's in his name I pray, amen.
Yesterday and today and forever, ever, ever. Whenever I'm with you, when I call your name, I don't feel broken, I just feel loved. I wanna be